Hello, and welcome to Lodestar's Lending Leaders. I'm Jim Paolino, founder and CEO of Lodestar Software Solutions. On this podcast, I'm going to be talking to leaders in the mortgage and real estate industries. Our goal is to talk about current events, interesting things from their end of the industry, and anything else that we feel is fascinating. Welcome to Triple L. On today's podcast, we have a very special guest, my friend Kosta Ligris. Kosta is the co-founder of Stavvy, a technology company in the real estate industry, former founder of Ligris Law Firm, and an entrepreneur in residence at MIT. So Kosta, thanks for coming today. You know, we have probably quite a bit to unpack with all of that. So we'd love to just kind of hear about how you got started in the industry. You mentioned when we were chatting before that you're a reformed attorney, turned technologist. So we'd love to kind of hear about that.
Yeah, no, Jim, thanks for having me. Excited to be here today. I'm a former scientist, actually. A lot of people don't know that, but I studied science, and I was a physiology and chemistry major in school, and I ended up in law school thinking I was going to end up in biotech and pharma and IP work. But of course, like every other little kid growing up, I always joke around, you either want to be in title and settlement or be a jet, a fighter jet pilot. And so I ended up in title and settlement. I practiced real estate law for almost 20 years. And as you mentioned, built out Ligris and Associates in Boston, and then ACES title in New England, New York, and Florida, and on the Eastern Seaboard.
Well, what got you in there in the first place? Was it just kind of a stumbling across, or like, oh, if I do one closing, I can pay the rent. Then what if I do two? What if I do three?
Yeah, if I do three closings, I can pay both rents. So 2 months of rent. It was actually interesting. I was subletting space in a building with a bunch of other lawyers, and everyone did a little bit of everything. And I was the new kid who had just passed the bar and was excited to really try to tackle it all and get exposure. And so I went around, and they would hand me the stuff that they didn't want to do. And just generally speaking, nobody really wanted to negotiate residential purchase and sale agreements and do purchase and sale transactional work. And a bunch of them would refer me stuff that they didn't want to do, and I started doing a fair amount of real estate and saw the opportunity to scale and use a very systemic and programmatic way of processing files. It's my science side of my brain sort of thinking, how do we scale and make this a scalable operation? And that sort of was the genesis of my practice.
And then what kept you around from beyond that, from actually going from those 3 a month to
the rent
to
payment
30 to 300 and whatever it may be?
I had to pay the rent. So so what kept me around? I mean, obviously I resonated with real estate. I love real estate. I continue to invest in real estate and like to pretend to fix my places up and be active in the real estate space. But what really was interesting was it gave me an opportunity to sharpen sort of my skills in terms of negotiating contracts and representing clients, but in an area that tended not to be super adversarial, right? And most of the times, especially when you're operating in residential real estate, which I did a lot of, and in the tail end of my career, I started doing a lot larger stake residential and commercial transactions. Things do change a little bit, but generally speaking, the person wants to buy a property and the person wants to sell, the goal is the same. And so it's this alignment towards protecting your client's interests, creating a smooth transaction. And I enjoyed that. And frankly, one of the things I really loved about the operation was looking at how we could implement procedures and protocols and technology to scale, to train people that were coming from other spaces in the law or were interested in coming into the business. And I've always loved watching that organic in the organization. And so, it was really, I loved building the business, and it's exciting because I get to do it now again.
Yeah, and that actually gets to what you're doing now with Stavvy and switching off from the service end of the business to technology. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I set you up for that. See, that transition
I know.
was almost...
You run your own podcast. You know what you're doing here. Makes my job easy.
I'm a one-person show here. Yeah, no. So, I started getting to the point after I had acquired some title companies down in southern Florida and consolidated operations and done some M&A work for the company. It was really sort of looking at what was next for the organization, but really sort of deep down, I think it was resonating, and it was really a concept of sort of what was next for me in terms of challenges. I ended up back in school. I went to business school. And through that journey and experience, got to expose myself to an amazing innovation ecosystem in Kendall Square. And that's where the concept of really, I had been struggling for a couple of years in terms of what the future of the industry was going to look like. We all know that it's interesting. I was on a podcast last month, and the concept of are things moving fast or faster? And I think it's a good barometer. I think our industry is moving faster, but it's still not moving fast, right? And you and I have talked offline about some of the things that could be moving fast. But I knew that we were moving into a space of transformation and innovation, and so it was an exciting opportunity to take my experience, 20 years of understanding mortgage and settlement and title and that customer experience, and translating it to a digital experience. And so here we are now, fast forward from the genesis of Stavvy, really looking at how we can bring transformation in the space. And obviously Ron is becoming a household name in the real estate and mortgage space, and e-signatures are widely adopted in consumer transactions, and so it's an interesting time to be innovating in the space and watching the industry start to move.
I think I'm pretty sure I got the stat from our last conversation that even with the adoption of Ron and Rin and all these things you're hearing about now, e-closings I think are 4% of all closings, something like that right now.
Yeah, so I think the last data point that I can confidently say, I think, is October of last year, full digital, including eNote, all the way, was less than 1%. Right? So, I think that the incremental progress here is probably hybrid, right? I think, watching the movement into the hybrid space where a good portion of the package can be signed digitally. But of course, the challenge and adoption there is making sure that the investors and all of the shareholders along the life cycle of a loan accept digital signatures, and sort of that's the big cog in the wheel now, is sort of understanding that paradigm, because hybrid can mean a lot of different things. It's actually kind of funny, we always talk about how many acronyms there are in this business, right? But hybrid can mean digital for everything, including Ron, and then a paper note, or it can mean the inverse of that, which is digital note, but the state doesn't allow Ron yet, and so we're doing wet signatures on notarization documents.
And when you have conversations with lenders and they want to get started in some way, shape, or form, is it kind of like a shiny new toy type idea of we think this would be great for marketing, or are they very slow to start, or anywhere in between? How are lenders you're working with getting started in that space?
Yeah, it's we sort of see it all, and it depends on the lender. It depends on the size of the organization. Are they purely a mortgage lender? Are they a bank that also is involved in other banking operations, different credit lines and facilities? But what is definitely clear is that everyone understands the value of moving digital and what the consumer wants, and especially tomorrow's consumer, what they expect. I think what's really interesting is, and I talked to the team about this, and I actually posted this today because I saw something online, and it's, you can't really sell products. You have to sell solutions to problems. And so when we look at the opportunities, we're really, and this is not a talking point, but we tell our customers, we don't sell products. And that's why, we don't have off the shelf pricing for some of the stuff that we do, but we look at how do we provide a solution to solve some of the pain points and problems that the organizations have. And so if the pain point is around the process that currently exists for home equity lines, and how do we streamline that and make it better and safer for the customer and for our employees, because we do them in the branches, then great, we have some of those opportunities. And then in other opportunities, it's really around, we need to be able to streamline the communication between us and the title and settlement vendor to be able to provide them with the digitally signed documents and set them up for remote notarization. And so the conversations are all over the place. I think what COVID has done is, it's a double-edged sword. It's never made us more, everything that we're building and everything that we've built has never been more relevant. The problem is, depending on the size of the organization, it's the concept around implementation. What does this take to do our vendor vetting process? How do we train our people? How do we change procedures and policies? And what does that look like, both from an implementation perspective, but also scale and support? And I think that lenders are struggling with historically low interest rates, another round of PPP loans, their own stress testing, modifications. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here. And
Or their own stress in general of just being so busy for the last 10 months.
yeah, teams working from home, like
Yeah.
there's a lot, right? And so I think coming out of this, as we start to emerge from this pandemic, I like the term I've heard on the news, endemic. Once we come out of this pandemic and move into an endemic, what does that look like? Because it's pretty clear that the world can't go backwards. Like there is a lot of convenience associated around being able to empower consumers to do this digitally.
Do you think is going to be a step backwards at that point, or a desire for that, even something from people having to come into an office all the time, or
Yeah.
what ways is that going to affect the industry where people just try to go right back to maybe business as normal?
So I think the world is a complicated place, and even the United States of America are united in many ways, but ununited in many others. And so much fragmentation in the space and the way that things are done in New England and the attorney states versus other states. I mean, you look, California doesn't have a RON law, right? And that's where Silicon Valley is. Like, geez, it's awfully surprising. And so the question really becomes, what is it going to look like coming out of this? I mean, my prediction is that in the states that don't have permanent RON, we will continue to see some adoption in hybrid, but people will go back to some sense of the standard operating procedure, because we're humans, right? And so we have short-term memory with certain things. But I think that the cat's out of the bag. Lenders, the secondary market, the regulators. I think everyone can look at this and say technology can empower not only a better transaction, more transparent transaction, but creates a very programmatic log of events. How did things happen? It's easier to see who touched what, when, where. And so I think the progress will continue to evolve and will move into that direction. But an endemic will slow down innovation in the markets that don't have permanent legislation in place. What is interesting is watching a national scale, like the Secure Notarization Act, and how can national legislation impact the timing of this. And I think that is critical.
And we'll see if it ever gets to a point where there's something like that across the board or not. I mean, it would be interesting to see. Do you feel like lenders in general are nervous when you kind of bring them things that is ultimately going to save the time of their team and their staff? I remember I had a conversation once at an industry conference where I was talking about our solution saving this person's staff time, and he looked at me and goes, well, I mean, what are my employees supposed to do with that? Just sit around and scratch their balls all day? Like, that was kind of the answer of like, oh, you can't think of anything better for your team to do if they're saving 10 minutes a file, 20 minutes a file, whatever it may be.
Yeah, no, I mean, so it's interesting, we actually don't see, I've never really seen innovation take jobs away. And so if that's at the crux of what we're getting at, really, right?
Right.
When you actually historically look back at what innovation has been able to do, and we're not just talking about technological innovation, but innovation in general, what jobs have really been completely eliminated by innovation? Well, for the most part, an elevator operator, that's gone.
Telephone
right?
operator.
Telephone operator, like a switchboard person, right? But the reality is that usually what you start to see is, and so that's an interesting concept. Like, what are my people supposed to do if technology replaces this? Well, how about they do things that actually contribute to the bottom line? Because chasing trailing documents and scheduling something that a computer can do programmatically shouldn't be the time that they should spend. But how about, enabling them to spend more time interacting with your customer and creating a better experience or bringing in more business, right? And so it's an interesting concept. We don't see our technology as displacing people. We see it as empowering people to be able to work faster, work more efficiently, work more securely, and give them back time so that they can do the things that they should be doing.
Right. Or it's not like you will necessarily get to a point where you're eliminating people on your staff, but maybe there's less overtime, or maybe your hiring is a little slower than what it was before. Those improvements at the margin, and God forbid you have a happier staff to begin with too, because they're not running down trailing documents, to their point, all day.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so, looking at it from the
Yeah.
perspective of, you know, we're obviously going to have to deal with the CARES Act is created a backlog of forbearances now that are going to have to be resolved with modifications, and hopefully they all get modified. Some will obviously end up in foreclosure, and some are already coming out of forbearance and moving back into a normal cadence of payments. But the reality is, why should organizations go out and be hiring hundreds of people to ramp up for this,
Right.
knowing full well that the market has seasonality, the market is impacted by geopolitical events and things
Interest
happen where
rates. Yeah.
industries have to hire and then they let go of people when things slow down. That makes no sense. Like, why not empower your current workforce, as you said, to
Yeah.
create a culture where there's less risk of having to hire and then have a reduction in workforce because of the environmental changes, in the markets.
But are companies even willing to put in those type of projects right now? I mean, a lot of what we're seeing and hearing from lenders is I'm too busy with IRLA. We're too busy with volume. When things slow down, we'll take a look at this.
Well, this
I don't
business is,
know. Yeah.
yeah, no, you're right. I mean, we hear a lot of that too. This business is feast or famine, and
Yeah.
so the challenge is when they're really busy, they can afford to be looking at things, they can afford to spend money solving some of these inefficiencies and problems. But then they're too busy to do it, and they're like, "Oh, come back when it's less busy." When it's less busy, they're terrified that they're not going to be around. They have to fire everybody, and so they don't have money to spend on anything.
Yeah.
And so, at some point, I think I've written about this, but lenders need to really open the aperture in terms of partnering with fintechs and seeing how technology can be implemented to make their lives easier and to solve for some of these problems. Because nobody understands this probably better than you do, right? Like, the reality is that it's never been easier to build technology companies. There's so many resources now where you can build with less capital than you ever had to need and then be able to scale. And now with COVID showing that you can hire remote and work remote and scale remote,
Yeah.
it changes the paradigm. And so I don't want to say it's never been more accessible to leverage innovation and technology.
Well, so we spent some time bashing on title agents, bashing on lenders. Let's bash on fintechs right now, because not all companies are created equal. And I do think that there is a problem. Sure, it's easy to create technology. There's very easy to create something that looks really good. But how do you balance it with a use case that actually works for people in the industry? I always joke, you see all too often in industry conferences, I call it the startup uniform. Someone has a t-shirt, their blazer and jeans on, right? And plenty of these solutions work really well and have totally changed the industry. But I think it's someone like you who has that industry background when they're bringing that out. So at what point is innovation helpful versus innovation for innovation's sakes, or just kind of that next, flashy technology?
All right, so there's a lot to unpack there. So first of all, I don't bash anyone. I don't bash lenders. I don't bash title agents. I love them all.
Yeah. Spend time talking about. Yeah.
On the Lodestar Software Solutions podcast, we make observations. Okay, so
There you go.
I think
Observations.
That's
I
a
like
safe
it.
word. So observations. The second thing I get from that is I got to make sure that the next time I'm at an Alta event or if I'm speaking at an event, no t-shirt and blazer. I got to figure out a different uniform now, I guess.
I don't know. Is that the Stavvy thing? I don't think you were wearing that the last time I saw you.
No. I wear hoodies. There's no blazers here.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, I put on a suit for that. That's the only time I ever.
There you go.
have
I'm
to
not
wear
even
a
going to
suit,
pretend.
so.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So I've gone full t-shirt. I was full hoodie and jeans.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So I think first and foremost, one of the things I'm really passionate about, and I talk about it very often, and in some way, shape, or form, I find a way to sort of introduce it, is the concept of responsible innovation. I think it's really important. It's a term that I've been using for quite some time. I hope people steal it and start talking about it because I think it's important. What do they say? Imitation, the best imitation.
Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery.
Look at you, ready to go.
I know my quotes. Yeah.
I really believe that innovation is important. We're creating opportunity for consumers, creating that efficiency, but not creating new barriers to entry into financial services and credit for underserved communities, underrepresented populations, and the like. And so that's really important. That's priority number one. Is everything we build, we're always at the forefront of thinking about that. We're also always thinking about security. Like, how is everything that we're building, create a secure experience? Just because it makes it easier doesn't mean that you can you can compromise on security and safety associated with handling information, consumer information. But finally, this attitude of and perception of really understanding the space is really important, and we're seeing that becoming more and more prevalent and relevant. It's, building software is one thing, building software that can actually solve particular types of problems is another thing. Understanding the problems that you're solving is a different paradigm, and so it's a different level of awareness. And so I think, given the fact that I've been in this industry for as long as I have and longer than I care to really admit, really understanding where we can push and where we can bring change is important. I tell my students often that one of the behaviors that's really charged, we spend so much time looking at our competitors, and even startups will spend time doing competitive landscape, and there's always that slide in the pitch deck with competitive landscape. The one thing that is so powerful that I feel like a lot of people sort of miss is the status quo. Coming off the status quo is the hardest thing. Yeah. Sometimes it's not about, competitor one and competitor two. It's how do I get you off of paper and the current process that's very, very lacking in terms of any semblance of technology. How do I get you off of what you're currently doing? Because change is scary.
Yeah. Or just the manual process. For you, instead of doing an e-closing, you're not necessarily displacing a digital closing vendor. It's just someone sending someone to go out there. It's just the general human component of, Sally's always done our closing, so we want to stay with that.
Yeah.
And right. It's just that element of it where Sally can do a whole lot more closings if you actually implement the software correctly.
Yeah. And so, you're hitting on a great point. Our hypothesis at Stavvy is we want to empower Sally. We don't have notaries at Stavvy, right? So we are a platform. And so we empower the technology, the title and settlement vendors and the law firms that people have built relationships with, that have built their businesses around it, that loan officers rely on for referrals and that have relied on for service to their customers and the relationship building and their sphere and their network. We leverage that. We give them the powers to move digital.
I think it's a part of, so early on when I started, I was doing some sales calls, and I talked to one, I think it was a title agent. I asked them about our solution, and the response I got was, well, our owner doesn't really like the internet.
Yeah, that damn interweb, that interweb always.
It's just the fact. And I feel like you see, on one end of the spectrum, just kind of the very much not innovating. This is how we've done things for 45 years, and this is how we do things. And then on the other end, it's you're going to do absolutely everything you can on this, and you will never talk to a human ever. We're going to have title robots, mortgage robots, AI, everything. And I don't think either of those are the answer at the end of the day. I think it's finding the kind of complicated combination of the two where you can use that technology, like what Stavvy has, to really push the other elements of what your team can do.
Honestly, you're 100% right, and I think it's that balance, and so that's what I think you're referring to. And when you look at Redfin, it's an amazing example of a business that at its genesis, they were going to revolutionize real estate brokerage, right? They were going to remove the brokers from the equation. And here we are now, fast forward 20 plus years, and Redfin is a brokerage company.
Yep.
They certainly have great technology, great user experience, an app and a different platform. And obviously, the incentive to consumers when they buy through the platform and buy and sell at the same time, they have a different pricing model. But at the end of the day, what did they become? They became a brokerage, platform. And so I think that is very telling, because even though most consumers start online and understand the space, a lot of the stuff that traditionally real estate brokers perhaps would have done is explain the neighborhoods and maybe drive you around. Yeah, that's all changed. But at their core, they're still such an important piece of the transaction. They understand the local intricacies. They can connect you to the players you need to make the deal happen. They know what's coming on when. And a computer can't predict when you're going to sell your property. Well, I bet Facebook and Google thinks that they can, but the reality is it's still at execution at scale. This is a personal business.
And it's a personal business around the largest transaction of most people's lives, too.
That's right.
And I feel like that can often be lost, especially when you're thinking of technology or other ways of streamlining things, of actually the importance of what this means for the consumer.
Yep.
Last question we have here as we're wrapping up here. If you could wave a magic wand to solve one major problem in the real estate industry, what would it be?
Wire fraud.
Yeah. Quick answer. I like it. Yeah.
Wire fraud, especially considering the impact that it has on consumers that have saved up to buy a home, the impact that it has to title and settlement vendors that are exposed, and it's a big issue. It hasn't gotten any better, and I have yet to see a solution that can solve the problem, because it's a systemic problem that affects behavior.
I think the issue is you just have too many people involved in the transaction. So the bank could have a great system, a title agent and attorney could have a great system. What about the realtor that's on Gmail? Or what about the notary that's on Yahoo or something like that? There's just so many people involved in the process that it's a very complicated problem to solve.
That fragmentation is at the core of why this is such a dangerous problem.
Yeah, I think no easy solve, but I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'll see those stories about someone's down payment gone, or $100,000 that someone saved up just missing in a blink of an eye, are just heartbreaking.
Nothing makes your stomach turn faster than to hear about a wire fraud situation that has gone poorly.
Yeah. Oh. Hey, thanks so much for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug, places people could find you, anything you want to kind of end on?
Thank you for having me. I'm active on Twitter, Kosta Ligris, so feel free to follow me. I rant and rave about stuff I'm passionate about. I don't hold back, and I also tweet a lot about real estate and all things local here at home in Boston. So
we'll make sure we promote that as well, so everyone can find you.
Awesome, Jim. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Kosta. This was a good time.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to Lodestar's Lending Leaders. Please like and subscribe wherever you get this podcast. If you have any ideas for upcoming episodes or would like to be a guest, please reach out to us at lendingleaders@lssoftwaresolutions.com. Hope to hear from you.